But I think it's because everyone has those parties there.
But he's also.
So y'all aren't the ones making the noise today, huh?
No, not today.
You reading it?
I have. I'm doing a oral interpretation for Hazel.
Coming to the play tonight?
I'm gonna work with you for Wednesday night, so.
Tomorrow night.
I think I'm almost in home.
Yeah, it goes till Sunday. Pretty funny. I mean,
Wow. Oh, I will then.
I don't think I've ever done
Dude, one of
By the way.
I'm in PT. My arm.
That's what I was about to say.
I didn't take a different class in the gym though, so I went
Yeah.
So what I would try, because I would try pulling up YouTube.
Yeah. Wait, what was I kind of thinking?
Because when we do that,
Alright, I'm going over. I'm going down.
Where is the computer today?
No, but I want to get cool shots.
Oh, I want to sit
Actually,
up front.
I don't want to sit down. I want to sit in the front.
I like sitting where we sit, like on the side up front, because
yeah, like where I said, about where you wanted to push that to. Oh, okay. So I would try that.
I like sitting up, like right where we're at.
Yeah, I only like sitting up front. I'm sorry. No.
I feel like I should change my seat in psychology though. Hi, Dane. And then I start halfway through the back semester.
Hi, Morgan. Morgan.
I feel like I should change it.
Morgan.
Hey. Hi, David.
How are you?
Hey, David, this is a library. Try to keep it down. Don't be yelling.
We're not
It's
being
none of
loud
my
today.
business.
She complimented us somewhat.
And then David comes over and goes, Morgan.
You want me to go lower and louder? I can definitely do that.
Why would we ask for like
Keep it up, David. You can really go.
Hey. Okay, you can like see how far he goes before I slap it down.
Yes.
Ooh.
Verbally, of course.
I'm not gonna stop. Please. I'm real sensitive.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Bacon, I gotta go.
That's great.
The goat is like
Ireland.
I know.
Yes. Is it my tape? Yeah, it's my tape.
Oh,
That's
hello.
really weird too, I bet.
being good with
A little bit.
Yeah, there might be some. No, maybe not.
Alright, let's go take this one.
Friend emoji. The goat is the super beautiful.
Did you change it?
That's 2 months in a row.
Mine is paw prints.
Mine's a goat because I
Mine's
love
still the
goat.
goat.
Hey, let him learn. Let him learn. Let him learn. Let him learn.
Walking here pretty well. Thank you.
Hi.
Morning.
You should be doing this. You're the professional. Professional history lecturer.
No.
Nobody said you had to be professional. But Dean is. Dean's done several. I know. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Taryn.
Did Rick do something on the phone here?
He did. Yeah, he did.
What about a CD player? I mean, a CD, but no on my phone though.
I can hear it.
That's good enough.
So Taryn, at 12, I'll introduce you and then we can get started from
Okay,
there. So.
sure.
That's who's bringing her too?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then the class starts at 12, then.
She might have.
Oh, somebody's bringing a student down?
There might be students that are, she might have a learning lab or something. Hi there. Hi.
I'll do it in a couple minutes.
Sure.
Okay. Who's bringing the class down?
Betsy.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yesterday,
Yeah?
I wrote the acknowledgement
I wrote a whole big paragraph talking about it.
Oh, wow.
I didn't.
Oh, they're very funny. Well, you should have.
Well, I know, I'll go ahead.
Do you want your own, or you want to share?
No, we'll share.
I'll
We can share.
You wanna be first, is that what you're
Thank
saying?
you. We can share, Karen.
Yeah.
One last, I'll be ready in Oh, okay.
It's like 94.
Are you here for the lecture? Just here for
Oh, Harriet have a trip planned besides the St. Mary's?
Queen Mary. Queen Mary?
No, we don't. Oh, yeah, you went.
Oh, what is that?
Coming up, isn't it? Last weekend, March, first week of April.
We're gonna do a road trip sometime.
It's a great time. They wait till the weather's safe. Last weekend, we were in Wisconsin Dells area. Spend the weekend with Brooke and celebrate our grandkids.
How did that go?
You win.
So we're yay, right?
Water parks are my favorite place.
I don't know why.
But no, we're not quite, because before the Dells, the three bears park. And then I'm gonna take it. But that was another hour or so. And then I thought, this summer maybe we can take some cousins to the trip over there.
Jeannie, do you have a Kleenex somewhere?
It's a gorgeous area. They should have some behind the circulation desk, it's that's the girls up there. Having a glass of wine.
Have you wine anything?
We're going all the way to Iowa City next week. So I thought since we're there, we'd go to the Hoover Library. That's
Why, so you just picked up the city?
no, me and the students, Alaska, and grandma didn't see her. They go,
Writing or you gonna follow in his grandparents' footsteps?
well, maybe his grandmother, so I hope he doesn't fall in mine. It takes me a long time to get anything done.
Well, I'm going to have Kleenex.
But especially during the class.
Yeah, she said. Yeah.
Don't tell your mom.
Sometimes, well, it just depends on the topic and when there's classes organized. Because sometimes, she'll bring in topics, you know, whatever. So sometimes
I would get a regular seat and try it before you do it. Maybe there is something wrong with it.
Yeah, four.
Okay.
Yep, there you go.
Do y'all know for sure that Betsy's class is coming?
I think they're going to bring them. She said something about bringing her class.
Okay.
Or watching it with her class. It's not streamed. so
Yeah,
she
it
has to
is.
come-
It's being streamed.
Oh.
Oh, so she could be watching it in the classroom.
But it seems like they would, I don't know.
What's the question, Pete?
If Betsy's bringing her class or if they're watching it through streaming.
Okay, stream's active.
Yeah, I sent that out Monday, so I knew it should be.
Off the computer lab? Should I just ask her?
I think that's where she is.
Yeah, I'll just ask her.
Okay.
Sabbatical is fabulous.
You're on sabbatical soon?
You find enough to keep yourself occupied?
Oh, yeah.
No way, nobody
I have-
ever finds enough to keep themselves occupied, do they?
I have learned the fine art of Hudson. I can now take something that normally would have taken me 5-10 minutes and make it last 3 hours. And have a good time doing it.
What
And
is your
like,
project, Sharon?
What did I get done today? I'm researching open education resources to in psychology.
Yeah?
I'm taking a couple of continuing education classes.
Sweet.
So those are my 2 main.
Yeah, awesome. And is it just a semester or were you out the whole year?
Just a semester.
Okay, that's why I didn't realize it, okay.
Yep. So, but I can get up and cut till 1 or 2 before I get on my computer and start working on my project. So someday when I retire, then I can do the same thing, and then I don't have to sit on my computer at 1 or 2 and work on my project. I can do something. I can patch some work. Going to the Y every day, walking in the new track. Meeting Mary Jo there quite a bit.
Is there a lot of big crowd on you on the track or?
No, no matter how many cars are in the parking lot, it's never overcrowded.
Just don't go at 5 at night.
No,
That's a
that's a
early
nightmare.
morning and after school,
Then
Hey.
Welcome to our February library lecture. Today we are pleased to have retired English faculty with us today, Karen Harriet. And she recently did a tour, a civil rights tour through the South. And she is going to tell us about that information. And I think she's got a lot of awesome things to present to us today. So without any further hesitation, we will turn it over to Karen.
Betsy, do you wanna grab one of each of those?
Do you want me to pass these?
No, because I already gave some to those people.
Okay.
In May, I went with some friends and to see the civil rights sites and the tour is led by Mark and Leslie Swigum, who are longtime friends of mine. And they've been doing this for about 8 years to some extent, and now they do 3 tours in the fall, 3 tours in the spring. They're retired teachers, and they don't make any money off the trip. It's kind of a mission of theirs to do this. And most of the trips are organized through Lutheran churches, but they could. But if somebody wants to do a trip, they have to organize a group and go to them. So some friends of mine did that, and we went and said we'd like to do this. So Mark, when he retired, he took his own trip through the South, and he kind of met people. He looked up people in the phone book, and stopped at churches and just kind of made connections. And it's those connections that really made the trip. So we started in Anniston, Alabama, which was part of the Freedom Rides. The bus station was bombed, and then Birmingham, and Montgomery. Birmingham was where they had the dogs and Bull Connor, and the church was bombed. And then Montgomery is where the Selma and Montgomery march ended. That's where Martin Luther gave a speech on the steps, but before that, George Walls said something like segregation now, segregation forever. And Selma, we went there, They were having a celebration of honoring the foot soldiers of the Civil Rights Movement. Then Marion, Alabama, we just stopped and saw this woman talked about the night Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. And when he was killed, everything kind of relates, is related to each other. I think when he was killed, then they decided they had to have the Selma March. Philadelphia, Mississippi, to me that was the most affecting place I went. This is where these 3 civil rights workers were killed. They were white, so that made a difference. Greenwood, Mississippi, we went there. Different things took place there. Louisville, there was some Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a civil rights foot soldier. Clarksdale, to me that's the most fun place ever to go. I've been there several times. Then Memphis, Tennessee. But first of all, I'm thinking, what do you think of when you hear the word civil rights? And I'm trying to think of my history with civil rights. My great-grandmother in Sweden said that she saw an African in a fair in a cage. So, things have come different. Things have changed. This was in the 1900s, I think. Well, they used to have take Indians over and have them in cages or have them on display. So that's different. And then my mother said when she was growing up, she used to like to go to, she was from Iowa, and she used to like to go to Omaha to look at black people, but that's not what the word she used. The N-word was really commonly used in my family until maybe I was 10 years old, and then all of a sudden there's just a general feeling you can't say that anymore. No explanation, no, just kind of we don't say that word anymore. So, and I mean, it's just a kid, but I remember these marches and thinking, oh, this doesn't look like fun, and thinking maybe that some of them are troublemakers. But then I remember when the church was bombed, thinking that's pretty bad. I remember seeing the Sunday paper and thinking this is pretty bad to kill these little girls in a church. But yeah. Anyway, what do you think of when you hear the word civil rights? What was your history with the word and the thoughts and your experience? Anybody? Betsy, you're from Iowa. What did you think of? Did you used to go somewhere? But you're a lot younger. You're younger than me.
Actually, growing up, it was all white kids in my class.
Sure.
As the years have progressed now, both my sons have been with students of color, and I mean, they are used to that. I think the thing that really got our town was when the Methodist minister married a black man, and all of a sudden it's like, I think people understood that this is fine, this is okay. And how ironic it would be the minister to marry the black man to get all of us thinking that this is acceptable, this is fine. And so, kind of a quirky thing to happen to such a little town, but that changed perspectives quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of my brother Kurt, when he was young. Well, he was, I don't want to say a bad boy, but, he pushed it. And he used to refer to the blacks as in the N-word. And then time passed, and a good friend of theirs was partnered with a black man. And this man became Kurt's best friend. They went fishing together. So I think kind of, if you're exposed to people, I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I see my parents' attitudes have changed just by being where they live. When you're exposed to people, and that makes a difference. Anyway, here's our group, but then here's Charles Avery. He was a foot soldier, and so was his daughter. She's been doing some research on it. And Charles Avery's senior class walked out of high school, leading 800 students in a 10-mile march to Birmingham. So, okay, this is the timeline for the tour. The Emmett Till murder and trial that kicked off the civil rights movement, I think, because, or that's one theory. Anybody know who Emmett Till was? Okay, he was a little boy, not little boy, about 11 years old, something like that. He went to the Mississippi Delta to visit his family, and his mother was worried about, you got to be careful down there. It's not like up here in Chicago. Anyway, he whistled at a white woman. They came and kidnapped him and murdered him and threw him in the river. And then they had a trial, and the people that killed him were let off, and even though they confessed later. But the big thing is his mother insisted on open caskets. So there was a picture of him with his just totally destroyed face in an open casket, and that went all over the world. And that kind of started some of this. Montgomery bus boycott. They were. It was discrimination. You couldn't sit in the front of the bus, and if you're black. And they, for a year, they didn't ride the bus, and people had to give each other rides. This took a lot of effort. Then freedom rides on inner-city buses. Birmingham Project confrontations is when they had marches, and this is kind of, if you remember seeing pictures of the dogs and the fire hoses and all that. Bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, that's when these little girls were killed. Now, most of you probably don't even remember that, I'm thinking. Is Dean and I the only one that remembers that?
What was the date? It was this time of year when he was killed, but do you know?
Oh, no, who? Emmett Till.
Martin Luther King.
Martin
Oh, you're
Luther
talking
King.
about Emmett Till.
It was Martin Luther King. He was killed in April. And Emmett Till, he was killed at the end of the summer. He was visiting in the summer, and the bombing took place, I believe, in the fall. So that's 1963. They had the and this looked really bad over the news wires to have these dogs and fire hoses and a bull cotter and people like where I was growing up. Let's see, I was 11 years old then. You go about your life. You're not really aware, and I wasn't really aware of the discrimination that the black people endured about Jim Crow laws. Freedom Summer, that was 1964. That was the murder of the 3 civil rights workers. Formation of Mississippi Freedom Party and Democratic Party and Fannie Lou Hamer. 1965 was the big Selma to Montgomery March. Bloody Sunday, Turnaround Tuesday, the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, Viola Liuzzo. Does anybody remember? Well, Dean probably the only one, and Annie. Remember that when Viola Liuzzo was killed? Okay, she was a civil rights. She had gone down from Michigan to drive. She was just driving people. And with the civil rights march from Selma to Montgomery, there was a lot of rumors about there being orgies and all this kind of stuff. So she was murdered and her reputation was trashed. 1968, Martin Luther King assassinated. So I'll just go on. Okay, so one of the neat things about the trip was we got to meet some of these civil rights foot soldiers. The first person we met was Bishop Calvin Woods. He was beaten, arrested in prison. So he showed us around Kelly Ingram Park. And then he sang some freedom songs, and it was totally delightful. And I think he called Mark, my friend, Doctor, or Doc. Well, he's not a doctor, he was an elementary school teacher. This is Kelly Ingram Park. They have memorials to the dogs and the kids. This is the Baptist church. We went there for services on Sunday, and this was the church that was bombed. We went there for service. And this was when it was killed. 4 little girls. Many were injured. Now, one of the people we talked to was Carolyn McKinstry. She was a witness to the bombing, and she was also a foot soldier in the Children's March. Her friends were the ones that were killed. She was sitting in the office, and in the church office, and her friends were in the bathroom, and the phone rang and it said just 3 minutes, and then boom, it went off. So she wrote a book. A lot of these speakers that we talked to, we bought their books. They were all interesting to read. I made my own picture book. Maybe I should pass this around. This is kind of what I do. And then I try to look up all the facts so I remember things. But I'll pass this around. But I've since seen some videos on the civil rights movement, and they sometimes interview her. But her book was interesting. She had PTSD. She had a lot of survivor's guilt after this. And of course, Rosa Parks. Now, Rosa Parks, she was involved in the civil rights movement. It was just not like some woman decided she didn't want to sit in the back. This was kind of planned. This is a lady we met, and I thought was very interesting. She was, her husband was a pastor of an all-black Lutheran church, and she was a neighbor and friend of Rosa Parks. And there was a one-day bus boycott, and that went to 382 days. Her home was bombed several times. Well, we're down in Montgomery now. Martin Luther King, his first pastoral job was age 26, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. That's just hard to believe. But she had 7 children, and whenever her house was bombed several times, and when she'd hear noise, she'd tell the kids to hide behind the couch. And as a neighbor and friend of Rosa Parks, a lot of activity took place at her house. And her husband is still alive, but he's not in very good shape. But she's an activist, and later she took up the LGBT movement because her son was gay, so she got interested in that too. But I thought, what a woman. 7 kids, I can't imagine 7 kids. But 7 kids and to be that active in the movement. Southern Poverty Law Center. This place has had some controversy, but I think it's an interesting place to go. They monitor hate groups. And they had this memorial. It was just very moving to sit and feel all these names of these civil rights heroes and foot soldiers, and this was pretty moving. I didn't hear everybody talk about what they thought about civil rights or their impressions. See, Dean, when you were a little kid in Austin, did you talk about civil rights? You're just a little older than me. Do you remember the bombing?
No, the first thing the thing that always sticks in my mind was Rhea asked you. Martin Luther King was killed on a Wednesday. I was usher at a Lenten service at church.
Okay.
A man walked in, and everyone was kind of buzzing about that. And this person said, "Well, you know, that guy had it coming." So I mean that's one. And I remember who that person was, and I've often wondered in the course of the rest of his life, has he ever looked into himself and wondered if he wished he
people
would have said
change.
that?
People change. I like Maya Angelou. This is a misquote, but when you know better, you do better. And a lot of people, if you haven't been exposed to these situations or to people, and I said with my parents, just live in where they live and all the diversity that's come to their town. And my mother was a pink lady at the hospital, and she'd meet all these people of color and got to know them and thought they were nice people. So, now, Jeannie, you grew up in the South. Tell me about that.
I was just sitting here thinking as you were talking about it all. So, I grew up I was born in '67, so didn't really know a lot of the early things. But, I grew up in a small town, and it was, and still in my hometown, they bus the students so that every school is mixed race, so that there are pockets of town where you have more African Americans.
Uh-huh.
And so I know I used to ride a bus for an hour each way to school so they could make sure that every school was desegregated.
Okay.
So that we were all mixed, and I, you know, and referring to, it's interesting to hear you referring to, people up here using the N-word, because I know growing up a lot of times that was used to refer to an African American, but even in today's world in the South, you'll hear that word a lot, but not necessarily about skin color. It's more about the
Social
way
status.
they live. Like,
Oh, okay.
it's kind of like it's also used to refer to people that you might better have heard referred to as white trash.
Uh-huh.
That also people use the N-word to refer to them.
Sure.
So that's kind of my, yeah.
Yeah, no, you know, as we all grew up different. I said I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. We, the only black people in my high school were from an orphanage. So there were very few Hispanics. It was pretty white.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a piece, this is also known as a lynching memorial. It was very interesting, because these were different people. This is in Duluth, the people that were lynched in Duluth. And it just had displays, and a lot of people were lynched. And this Brian Stevenson, who started this, who's in charge of the Equal Justice Initiative, he was behind the movie Just Mercy. I don't know if anybody saw that. You know, Annie and I saw it with one other woman. We were the only ones in the theater, so it wasn't a crowd pleaser here. But anybody heard of the movie Just Mercy? And there are a lot of other good books on the whole era. I mean, good movies. I saw The Green Book last year, and I know some people didn't like it because it was made by a white person, but I thought it was really a good book, I mean, a good movie, because it showed how traveling through the South in the Jim Crow era, how black people could not stay at hotels. You know, there's all the hotels, and on our trip, there's some places that were pointed out as a Green Book hotel. So I thought it was a good movie, and it was named Best Picture, but some people were mad about that. So anyway, but I thought Just Mercy, because it just shows life in the Jim Crow South. This man is on death row for something he did not do. They finally got him free. Martin Luther King Jr., this is the Capitol. One thing I thought was interesting was after the Civil War, there were more black legislators than there were, 30 years later, and that's because of the Jim Crow laws. There was a number of legislators, and then all of a sudden there weren't. And it said he preached at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and this is where he spoke to the crowd after the Selma and Montgomery March. But this is also where George Wallace writes, segregation now, segregation or forever, I forget the whole quote, but anyway. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, we went there, and this lady, she's a tour guide of the church, and she's a friend of my friend's, and I saw her up in the cities. She came to their church and sang, she has a great deep voice. She was good, but she was good with the kids, and very interesting to talk to. And my friends, Mark and Leslie, they're like personal friends of these people because they've gotten to know them over the years, and I know my friend Leslie brought a picture that her granddaughter wrote drew to give to this Wanda battle. So this was a parsonage. Oh, and then we met Velda Harris Montgomery. She was a neighbor of Martin Luther King, and they had a lot of activity at their house. And her mother hosted a lot of the planning of the Montgomery bus boycott. And her mother passed away this summer, so we're lucky to have met her. And then, these people, we had fun talking to them too, because she went to Catholic school. And so did Pat and Mike. They went to Catholic school, so they were commiserating about Catholic school. Anybody here been to Catholic school? Do you know what they would commiserate about?
I don't know.
About the nuns? mean
Oh,
strict.
Okay, yeah, they
I
were
mean,
strict.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't dislike it. They just had a bond. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we went to Selma. They had they had a mass meeting reenactment on that night, and it was really neat because they had some of the foot soldiers from the movement were there, and before the service we had the church people made us supper, so we had supper with them and got to visit with them, and that was neat. And I know my husband, he took an interest in this boy and was working on, I think, math with him. But this was a nice memory. So, historic Brown Chapel. If you've seen the movie, who's here has seen the movie Selma? Okay, did you like the movie?
I did.
I did too. You know, some of these movies are criticized because they're not totally accurate. But, you know, I think if they give you the general feeling, I thought it was a good movie. You know, and I'm not a historian, but that was a good movie. Anyway, these people were talking about the start of Bloody Sunday and marching, and I think they were in high school, and I think they had to sneak out. And this Joyce, I forget which one's Joyce. She'd gone to a Lutheran school. They had a Missouri State Lutheran College down there connected to a high school, and she had to cut class, and she was afraid she was going to be kicked out of school, but she wasn't. Anyway, I remember seeing this church on the movie Selma. Here's some footage from Bloody Sunday. That's when they started to march, and they were met by the police. And Hosea William and John Lewis. We've heard of John Lewis. Dean could tell us who John Lewis is.
Well, he still is a representative from.
Yeah.
But I also believe he has
Cancer.
pancreatic cancer or something. It's not a good diagnosis.
Yeah.
He's kind of the hero of the House of Representatives to me.
Yeah. No, and who was the other guy? Elijah Cummings, he died. But anyway, this is one of these is Hosea Williams and John Lewis marching on Bloody Sunday. And there's often reenactments of this. This is the tear gas, and I think this is a memorial. This is us on the going on the bridge. I think everybody that goes to Selma has to go to the bridge. Interesting thing about Selma is you could tell it was a beautiful city at one time. A lot of money down there, but it's poor now. And this is the one with the Minnesota connection, James Reeb. He was a Boston Unitarian minister, and he was beaten by the KKK and died 2 days later. And the people that killed him were ID'd by the companions, but they were all acquitted. And this is a new podcast, White Lies. Do any of you people listen to podcasts? Probably not. You do?
I listen to ones you suggest.
Oh. Well, good. I'm glad someone listens to me. I'm always telling people what to do and no one listens to me. Did you listen to White Lies, or did I tell you to listen to that?
I don't think so.
Uh-huh. Well, okay, White Lies, this just came out last summer, and it's just like 6 episodes, and I thought it was very interesting. But this is a guy, he was just in Boston, and he wanted to come down, and he was killed. 4 kids. This talks about the march, peaceful march to Montgomery. This was after, I think, after the Bloody Sunday. Because after the Bloody Sunday, they went and regrouped. Anyway, they marched, a bunch of people marched the first day, and then much fewer people the last day. And then they were talking about all the orgies at the hot dog store in Montgomery. My husband went out to eat there, and the owner was telling them about all the orgies on the trip. But the people that didn't seem to think there would be, the people I talked to thought they were probably too tired to have a lot of orgies. Who knows? 25,000 marchers went the last 4 miles. Mrs. Viola Liuzzo, and this is a memorial to her. She was killed, murdered in the march. They kidnapped her and killed her. And then, yeah, there was always rumors. I remember, I grew up and, where I grew up, I remember my dad saying, well, I wonder what she's doing in a car with a bunch of colored men. So, and that kind of thing was said. So then we went to G's Bend. Has anybody heard of G's Bend? They make a lot of quilts there. And the quilts, if you're into quilting, you've heard of G's Bend. G's Bend, it's out in the middle of nowhere in Alabama, and it's hard to get to. And Martin Luther King one day wanted them to register to vote, and the only way they could take a ferry to Camden and register to vote, but then they discontinued the ferry, so it was discontinued for many years. So then they were really isolated. Anyway, these ladies were encouraged to form a cooperative and make quilts, and be self-supporting, and so some of their quilts have won a lot of awards. They're very expensive, so just this piece was expensive. So I think there's people out there with money that'll pay a lot of money for them. But it was fun to go there. So no one's heard of G's. Do any of you ladies quilt? Anyway, then we went on to Marion, Alabama. And this is where Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered. He was on a civil rights march. And, what they wanted is the right to vote. And they wanted the right to vote. They wanted the right to vote so they could get rid of a lot of these Jim Crow laws. So they would be able to go to like swimming pools and parks and all these places they couldn't go to. They were just really limited. And one lady was talking about when her mom went to the hospital, just poor care. The blacks did not get good care, and it was just not equal at all. So this Willie Nell Avery, she was help register people to vote. So she talks about the night that they were killed. This Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. And then out in the middle of nowhere is where Coretta Scott King was born. This is her home. And then there was a church next door and a little store. What I found interesting is Coretta Scott King, she must have been a really smart lady, or I don't know how. She went to Boston University and majored in music. And that's a long way to go from Heiberger, Alabama. I kind of wonder. It's just interesting that you can be out in the middle of nowhere and go to school like Boston University. Now this is the part I thought was the creepiest part of the trip, because you're driving like in the middle of nowhere, a lot of woods, and then you see a sign that this is where these 3 men were killed. These Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. And these were white civil rights workers that went down to help register people to vote. They had freedom schools. And they were kidnapped and murdered. And did anybody see the movie Mississippi Burning? I liked the movie, but it was, it's a Hollywood movie. A lot of, you don't do a term paper on this using that movie, because a lot of inaccuracies. And I don't think there was as many explosions in real life as there was in the movie. But I thought the movie was good, and it gave a feeling of the terror that these people felt. And my friend Mark, when he went down here, he just kind of walked in, found the church because he knew where it was. This is like out in the middle of nowhere, the church, and walked in the middle of the day and says, "Does anybody know anybody that was there the night of the murder of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman?" And one lady said, there was a church council meeting, and one lady's like, "Well, I was there." So he met her and started talking to her, and then she's one of the ladies that we talked to. You can't see very good on, this is the lady, Jewel Rush McDonald. Anyway, it was just interesting, because the person that was, one of the people that was killed, came to her house that night looking for the other people. So she was there, and then I think her mother was beat up by the Klan, or her brother, and she left the area for a number of years, but then she came back. And same with Beverly and Randy McClellan owned this cafe that was, we had the most fun there, just had a lot of fun hanging out with these people. And this guy, Mayor James Young, is a leader, and he was just talking about the challenges of economic development in Philadelphia, Mississippi. But she gave us peach cobbler, so to take with us. So, the food was really good. We just had a lot of fun. We didn't eat in 5-star restaurants or anything, but this was great. This was great. I think we had pork sandwiches every day, which I like.
You probably had better food eating at the little places than the 5 stars, I guarantee you.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm not complaining. It was pretty good. But these people were really nice and fun, and you could tell that my friends were friends with them. Then we went to Greenwood, Mississippi, and this is a really interesting place. There was division in the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, his thing was nonviolence, and these people were really trained in nonviolent techniques, and they didn't want people coming. They didn't want people to get part of the movement if they were going to fight back, and the whole. Well, first of all, they couldn't have fought back because they were outgunned, so the whole thing was nonviolence, and that played well on the national news when people would be beating them up and they'd be nonviolent in return. But then, Black Power speech, then in 1966, Stokely Carmichael came, and he started the talk about Black Power speech. So he said, we want Black Power. And I know that when I was a kid, that scared everybody. Black Power. The Help was, the house from the Help was in Greenwood, Mississippi. And there's Baptist Town, which is really poor. And then the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that had their headquarters there. And one thing was kind of interesting. My husband and I, we went on a civil rights pilgrimage in 2007 just by ourselves. We just got a book, the Traveler's Guide to the Civil Rights Movement. We got this book, and we got a book on tape of Martin Luther King, Taylor Branch, Parting the Waters, and it set off. Anyway, there was this place in Greenwood, which had been the headquarters of SNCC, and then across the street was a barber shop where the barber had helped them too. And I remember I went in there, just kind of checking it, and nobody there had any idea what had happened there. That's kind of unfortunate. You just want to shake people and say, don't you know what happened here? And then a year later, this is going to make me sound odd, but a year later, my husband, we had such a good time, we thought, we'll go back for the Blues Festival in Clarksdale. And then we went in, and then I had a bunch of people who were showing around. And there's this barber shop in the Baptist town in the black area. And I thought, well, we should go and see this barber shop again, show it to my friends. And my friends were kind of creeped out because they didn't want to go to a barber shop in a black part of town. But anyway, the guy goes, we walk in, the guy goes, I remember you. And so he remembered that I'd been there the year before. And then after a couple minutes, my friends were all nervous. And then after a while, everyone's like having fun, talking to each other. I think if you could just talk to people and get to know people, it's good. I think that is kind of the key. Then after that, we went to Money, Mississippi, went through Money, Mississippi. This is where Emmett Till was killed, or was kidnapped. The store there's not much left of the store at all. And he was kidnapped just for whistling at a white woman. And then after that, we went to Glendora, Mississippi, which is where they had a museum to Emmett Till. And this is the bridge where his body was pulled out of the river. Look how brown it is. It's just, you could just imagine how, when in August, how much hot it must have been, just really oppressive, and the Delta, and just different part of the world. I've traveled to a lot of places in my life. I've been lucky, but I think I haven't been anywhere that's as much interesting or fun as Mississippi. That I'd go back in a heartbeat. I'd love to go back to Clarksdale, but anyway. So Sumner, this is where the courthouse where these people that killed Emmett Till were tried, and this guy, he was kind of explaining it all and showing, you know, where the people stood and all about the trial. This is really out in the middle of nowhere. This is really economically depressed, but there had been better times there. Okay. Now this is the Emmett Till Tallahatchie Bridge sign we saw. This is a site where his body was removed from the river. And look at how it was shot up. And I guess that, and then these boys had posed with the picture and put it on social media. It's too bad. I mean, a lot of boys, no offense, male people, can be stupid. And, you know, you wish there was a way just to bring them along, you know. I said, when you know better, you do better. You know, yeah, they just were being stupid. Louisville, Mississippi, this is other people involved in the movement. And I said, it was just so great how we could meet and talk to all these people. And it's because of my friend Mark had done all the footwork and got to know these people. He knew Fannie Lou Hamer died a while ago, but he worked in the civil rights movement and spent time in Parchman Prison. Anybody read about Parchman Prison lately in Mississippi?
Oh, is that where all the violence is?
Yeah, it's a bad place. And a lot of people in the movement had spent time in Parchman Prison. I've driven by it a couple times because it's on the way to Clarksdale. And they talked about Freedom Summer, 1964. Here's another picture. Oh, that's probably a picture of Charles McLaurin. But they were talking about the difficulty in registering to vote. You'd go to try to register, and then you'd get these quizzes that, you know, you could not pass. And so that's why there's so few people registered to vote. And this place near Gee's Bend in Alabama, I remember reading that in the 60s there was like no registered black voters. You know, these people fought so hard for the right to vote, and you think of people nowadays not voting or think it doesn't matter. Clarksdale, this is my favorite place. Home of the blues. And I bet nobody here's heard of Clarksdale, unless they've talked to me. Because everybody, well, when we recommend it to people, like my brother-in-law's now been there a couple times, loves to go to Clarksdale, and it's just a really fun place. You can stay at this place called the Shack Up Inn, and which they brought in a bunch of shacks and kind of, I wouldn't say modernize them because they kind of still look lousy, but you know, at least they're clean, and you can stay in a shack. And I think if you see the book, 1,000 Things to Do See in the U.S. Before You Die, this is the Shack Up Inn is one of those places. So this was fun. We heard some music that night. The Crossroads, this is where the blues started. I forget the story. This is the last stop was we went to the National Civil Rights Museum. And this is Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was killed. And my husband got sick of being in a museum because he could only take so much, so he snuck out and got a peanut butter and banana sandwich that they said Elvis ate. Like to eat. Last lunch was a Central Barbecue, and then we went to the airport. Okay, personal observations. It was strategic, early use of media. I thought it was interesting how it was well planned. You know, like Rosa Parks just didn't one day decide she was sick of it. This was planned. Organization and church churches and church leaders played an active role. And then the significance of slavery as an American institution cannot be underestimated. I think a lot of repercussions, current issues, voter suppression. We're still having that today. Well, they had a Voting Rights Act a long time ago, but now they're trying to take people off the voter rolls. Racism, mass incarceration. I read, my daughter gave this to my husband, told him to read it, and I read it too. And it was actually interesting. It wasn't just a book whining about stuff. It was like, they're citing sources. It was just, it's more of an academic book. I thought it was very interesting. And the whole thing, institutionalized racism, for years, if you had crack cocaine, you'd go to prison. If you had just plain old cocaine, like rich white people have, not a lot of penalty. There's just a lot of things like that. And, black people couldn't buy houses in certain areas, and just a lot of issues. Educate ourselves, challenge racist narratives, and never take your right to vote, travel, and purchase for granted. And especially this thing, right to vote, is just so important. But then I think I like travel and when I just think of how these people were suppressed or just didn't have the freedom, just things we take for granted. And I said, as a little kid in Chicago, I just wasn't aware of much of this. And but I said, if you know better, you do better. So I think we could all have something to learn. This is it. Any questions?
A lot of the people that you talk to, Karen, they're getting up there in years.
Yeah.
And there won't be anybody left that lived through it, right?
Right.
Okay, but most of them, you said, have left memoirs and things like that.
Well, I should say most of them, but a lot of them have written books. But I figure I'm 67, no big surprise to anybody. And I was in grade school when this happened. So most of these people are a little older than me that spoke. So a little older or a lot older. So I feel really fortunate that to me, visiting with the speakers was the best part of the trip. And then also, before the trip, we had a lot of reading to do and videos to watch, so we had homework. So,
Rick made you do homework, right?
Right. Like when I travel with Dean, he gives us homework. So, but you get, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I said when my husband and I did the trip, we had the Parting the Waters, the Martin Luther King autobiography in the car radio. So you just can't go and absorb it all. And I absorbed a lot more once I took the books home and was reading them. So it was a great trip, and I feel fortunate to have gone on it. And yeah. So any other questions?
When you were down there, did you, the racial issues are ongoing. Were any of the people that you talked to talk about what currently was going on?
No. Not really. This Jewel Rush McDonald, she thought that the Klan was still a little bit active, but not like before. She said there's little signs in the woods, but no, they didn't really talk about present day. I think it's better, but there's still a lot of challenges.
That's just really weird to me, because I grew up and, have had Morgan, Minnesota population 972. We didn't even have one black person in our class. I mean.
Sure.
So the idea that, oh yeah, it's way better than it was, but the Klan is still there and active, and it's like, really?
Yeah.
It's still active? Because that's just not my reality, so.
Yeah. Well, it's just so hard for me to picture that, this Jim Crow laws that blacks couldn't go swimming in the swimming pool, and just things like that, it's hard to imagine.
Didn't you say that Owatonna used to be a hotbed of Klan activity? Didn't you say Owatonna Owatonna used to be a hotbed of Klan
Oh, yes,
activity?
it did. Steele County, wow, there was quite a few Klansmen in Moore County in Austin, you bet. There was a giant meeting, in the area of Rose Creek, between here and Rose Creek, in a field where, you don't wanna believe the Klan's number, but many people were inducted into the Klan from Austin, you bet.
But were they, I mean, what did they do? They didn't lynch anybody.
I mean, when I grew up, we had, let's see, our only person that we had here that might have been a little different was Dieter Pesch, and he was from Germany, he was a foreign.
What is that?
I said, we didn't have any blacks, it was just, we had Dieter Pesch, who was from Germany, and he was a foreign exchange.
Okay.
Those Germans. Whiter than me. Those Germans.
I was gonna say that 50 years
So
ago,
this just
I
amazes
was
me.
here, I was a student here,
Yeah.
and I don't remember a single person, black person here. The first time, almost first time in my life that I ever interacted with, black people was when I went off to Mankato State.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So I, like Karen, want to know, what did the Klan do here? I've never really done a lot of research, but what I have been told is it kind of was an organization more against Catholics.
Yes, around here it was anti-Catholic.
Right, it wasn't
Also,
the same as what you saw in
anti-Jewish.
and
You bet.
anti-Jewish.
Yes.
Here, I didn't know it.
Cause there's
They
no
were-
black people here to be.
Right.
You gotta find somebody to be the enemy if
Yeah,
you're
don't we
gonna be
always
a Klansman.
Yeah.
One of the, I'm going off on a rant here, but in the early 20s, the mayor of Austin was George Hirsch. George Hirsch was a Jewish gentleman who had a clothing store on Main Street. And when the Klan was meeting in Austin, there was a little piece in the Austin Daily Herald that I forever admired this man for, and he said, "You guys wanna come to Austin, be our guests, more or less. Our policemen are well-trained and well-armed." You know, and I've always admired George Hirsch, just for that thing. I didn't know anything else really about him, other than he was a pretty feisty person.
So they, Rose Creek and Owatonna and from our county, but they didn't have a chapter in Austin itself.
I think they did.
They did.
You understand
Something
that
that
people, those records have a way of disappearing. If you wanna know about the Klan and around here, the lady to talk to is a lady called Nancy Valancourt, who's the librarian at Blooming Prairie Library. And she's written in Minnesota History Quarterly, she wrote a significant article about the Klan in here, Freeborn, Moore, Steele counties, Dodge County.
Well, my friends Mark and Leslie were featured in a recent periodical of the Alabama tourism. And Mark was saying that they're doing this because he says he retired and he wanted something productive to do. He just didn't want to sit around. And I said Mark had been to the seminary. He was at one time prepared to be a pastor and decided to be an elementary school teacher instead, but I think he still feels a mission. So, and they said, you know, they lead groups, the groups have to approach them. And Leslie said when the group approaches them, they look at their church website and see if they have any social justice things going on, or they just won't take anybody. And if they don't want to take these people, they'll say, well, we're busy. But it's usually church groups that approach them.
It's interesting for me, as a Southerner, to be here at Riverland, because when you look definitely at our faculty, but at our faculty and staff both, the high majority of whites. And people in Tennessee, my family, my friends down there, are just astounded that we really don't have any African Americans on our staff and in employment here, because you won't find a non-private organization, business of any kind in the South that is as unevenly balanced race-wise down there as we have here, which is interesting to me.
Now, the student body has changed.
Oh, yes.
Tremendously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I came in '89, and just since '89, it's changed.
Yeah.
180 degrees. So, people my age and the staff are getting close to retirement, and I believe our staff will change too. It will follow the student body changes.
Yeah,
Although it is hard to recruit people to come and teach in Austin, Minnesota for summer.
Yeah.
Much easier to recruit them to go to the U of M or something like that.
sure.
I violated my long-standing rule the other day, and
Oh,
after
no.
the nice article in the Tribune about the Austin
Oh, yeah.
basketball team, I started reading the comments. You should never do that. But, not everyone is in Minnesota, based on those comments, is especially enlightened about race either. So
No.
most of them were positive, but boy, there's some corkers
Yeah.
in there.
I think you're gonna find that everywhere though. I mean, everybody points to the South, and yeah, a ton of stuff happened in the South, but you're gonna find racism wherever you live.
Sure.
So,
Or
Yeah.
if you can't find, a race you want to persecute, then you're gonna pick a religion or a gender or a sexual orientation.
yeah. Yeah. So as somebody from the South also, I just wanna ask the opinion of you Northerners that are here today. So I think one of the biggest, hotbeds of dispute right now in the South is all Civil War, civil rights type of monuments are being done away with, like they're having to rename their streets, they're doing away with all the statues, the names of parks, everything because, that's hatred or whatever, but it's like, but you're destroying history, but they won't look at it that way. So am I just a typical Southerner that is upset that history's being destroyed and not seeing the other side of it? I mean,
In the Midwest here, you're seeing a lot of the same things being done with Native Americans.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's with the lake up in the
Well, I think,
In Calhoun, there's a big squabble about that. Right?
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I think there's a,
they're trying to erase history, but
It's
I
like
think
they're trying
there's
to
a line,
change it
like
or
if you're like,
something,
you have the
too.
Confederate flag on the state capitol or something versus you have a statue of a Civil War general with information about
and
what
that's
happened.
even like
It's very
the,
different.
the flag, the Confederate flag is historical, like, so most of the people that are flying the Confederate flag aren't flying it because they're racist, but yet it's so offensive to so many people, and I don't know, I think it's just a really faint line there that is, I don't know, it bothers me that it seems like a lot of history is being erased.
well, I think there's a way to change things, and, you can't have all these Confederate heroes and, honored, but there's a way to do it, and maybe
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
throwing
a
away.
Confederate flag can be in a museum and then it's history.
Or-
In the state capitol, it's not history.
Yeah,
Yeah, or you could
I
give a
like-
context.
yeah.
Maybe pick just the slightest of a bone with you in this.
Okay,
Respect.
okay, yeah.
But our daughter and son-in-law used to live in Lawrence, South Carolina. If you go there, the Civil War is front and center in your face.
Okay.
It seems to me every place in South Carolina, there are monuments of the Confederacy. But those monuments were put up in the early 20th century by people who were trying to erase their brand of they're trying to erase some history too.
Right.
So, I mean, if those monuments have been like our heroes, the boys in gray, in Lawrence and every other small town I was there, that monument is 15 feet tall, and the monument to the Vietnam and World War is this tall.
Yeah.
And to me, those the people who put that up in 1912 or whatever, they're
Right.
trying to rewrite history
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah, I can see that.
that's what people do.
Yeah, absolutely.
One interesting Confederate flag anecdote is my cousin in Sweden, he buys cars to take over back to Sweden, and he fills them up with, he had a bunch of Confederate flag towels. And we're like, well, what's that about, Confederate flag towels to sell at these little fairs? And he says, well, Confederate flag, that's about sticking it to the man. It's not about, you know, it's not about slavery or anything. It was
Yeah.
just kind of their
Right.
view of sticking it to the man, kind of like Dukes of Hazzard. And, and then, and then another relative, another part of Sweden, her husband has a Confederate flag tattoo on his arm, and we're like, oh. And well, some relatives from Iowa said that that was perfectly okay, it's an American flag, and I'm thinking, you know, don't show that off in Minnesota. And he says he got it kind of was, you know, kind of anti-immigrant thing in Sweden, you know, you have a Confederate flag, you're reclaiming Sweden for your own people, but, so I mean, these things mean a lot to, a lot of different things.
Yeah.
In Sweden means that you're reclaiming Sweden.
For the Swedes,
So racism.
From the, yeah.
from the Muslims.
Yeah,
Wow.
so kind of some of the same meaning, and
Yeah.
sometimes it means here.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
Oh, and we were in Norway and went to this, we pretend he's our relative, but his house has, probably isn't, but we went to this house and there's a sign, it was a Confederate parking sign, Confederate flag up in, this is out in the sticks in Norway, the Confederate flag sign.
Wow.
It's in redneck parking only.
Okay. What's their definition of a redneck?
Yeah.
Well, this is
Obviously,
Sweden,
that's
this is Norway.
Same as ours.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's interesting to get out and away and,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you, Karen.
This book is awesome.
Yeah.
Did you do
Oh.
this with all your trips?
Amazing.
No,
Thank all of you for
Hey,
coming.
This is a lot of
Appreciate
work.
it is a lot of work.
Good beans.
If my time was worth anything, that book would be like worth a couple $1,000s.
I make like scrapbooks, but nothing close to that.
Yeah.
Oh.
I should start doing that. Now I wanna take Haley on this
Yeah.
trip.
Are you? Are you going to dinner? Okay.
Yeah, we were thinking
Like,
about
what
it.
examples? I was getting a dinner, because I was dinner, but you.
Last,
What time is dinner?
last year,
4:45 to 5:45. You don't need to go.
What? Oh, yeah, no, please.
So,
Okay.
what is another that
we went to Battlefield of Frank, well.
I thought church was at 7.
I
take Haley, I'll
I don't
borrow
know,
my
you
book and
share
follow
your
it.
resources
Oh.
and where you like that. Another person decided, that's a lot. I don't know if I have to email or not.
How long were you down
Tell you
there?
how long. We ran in the car in the airport in
Because
Paris.
we're right going on like a big vacation. That might be something.
That's at her husband.
Yeah.
Okay.
We drove to,
We'll drive down and
No, I
stay in the hotel.
So I was listening to this before.
It's not expensive.
I would've liked to have been.
but yeah, we drove to.
Yeah, because we're not gonna drive it.
Yeah.
But like
Yes,
that.
yes, yes, I know, that's why I'm asking
She's
these
so in love
questions.
with
Yeah,
Martin.
yeah, so
King
we
of
drove
Civil
to
Rights
Battlefield
Movement.
and a lot of places. we went.
Yeah.
So it was
Wednesday
Wednesday, and I probably asked you this before, and my memory just forgets things.
You can borrow.
What the,
Yeah.
Wood?
Bella Wood.
Yeah, Bellawood, did you guys go there?
Oh, yes.
Okay, my mom was a good, I don't know.
Yeah, I got that one.
Civil rights
Uncle.
trail is
Yeah,
dying.
I'm sure there's a lot of stuff. I probably researched it before I went, of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
South Dakota, he was one person who wrote a book about him, and the civil rights trail.
I know she wants to go, you know.
So,
Haley will
all right,
totally
what,
get it.
what information?
Maybe I'll be like, all right, Lou, we'll
Anything,
go to
anything
like
like that.
something else.
Okay.
He'd be interested, but.
Clarksdale, everyone likes Clarksdale.
I can't give you the name of one.